I'm Christy.
And I'm Jackie.
And we are Killer Fun. We explore the intersection of crime and entertainment every other week.
For as long as people have been communicating, they have been talking about who did what to whom, and is that socially acceptable?
Because the boundaries of society,
crime,
and entertainment have always gone hand in hand.
The more salacious,
or weird,
the better. From books and movies
to television shows and games,
we look at how life and art imitate and inform one another.
And we can't get together and not laugh. So let's face it, there's going to be laughing.
Killer Fun is available anywhere you listen to podcasts, so join us.
This podcast is made possible by listeners like you. Go to our website at wdtatpodcast.com and click on support to learn how you can be part of this effort to learn how to have better conversations, increase compassion, and build bridges, not walls. You can make a one-time donation or become a patron for as little as $1 a month and receive patron-only benefits. This week's shout-out for patrons goes to Diamante Maya and Barbara Bridgewater. Thanks for joining our Patreon team, and thanks for supporting the podcast. Now let's get into the interview. In this episode, I talked to Erin Payseur Oeth about how to get beyond the binary in our discussions, being co-creators of the communities where we live, and we reveal the hidden truth that the government is us. Welcome to the podcast where we talk about things we're not supposed to, learn how to have difficult conversations, and talk to people about what makes them different. This is the We Don't Talk About That with Lucas Land podcast, where we do talk about that with me, Lucas Land.
It's never the right place or time. It's imperceptible to the eye. It's never the right place or time.
My guest today is Erin Payseur Oeth, who currently serves as project manager for community engagement at the University of Mississippi. Welcome to the podcast, Erin.
Thank you, Lucas.
And I'm excited to talk to you. I guess we're both former Wacoans now, although I plan to move back to Waco, and I don't think you plan to move back to Waco.
Probably not in the foreseeable future, but Waco has certainly been home for me for a while, and I definitely miss it and miss the community there.
Well, we met at in Waco while you were working at Baylor University and in the Office of Community Engagement, and one of the things that you were doing was a project at Baylor called Baylor Public Deliberation Initiative, and I'm not remembering all the steps. I think Deshauna Hawley was one of the ways that I ended up on the board, the advisory board for that, and got involved with that, and really fell in love with this idea of public deliberation. So I'm really excited to talk to you about it today. But first, tell us a little bit about yourself, what you're doing these days, and kind of how you got there.
Yes, I think, you said it well. I think just as you were talking about falling in love with public deliberation, I think I did as well. I am relatively new to Mississippi. I've been here for almost a year now, transplanting from the Waco community to Mississippi, which has been a wonderful experience. My husband took a new job here. We wanted to be closer to both of our families. My family is in North Carolina. His is in Indiana. And so Mississippi was a great stopping place for us. And we found here just really a thriving community. But similar to a lot of our communities, certainly similar to Waco and similar to a lot of other stories going on around the country, just the need for more civic learning skills and practice. And so it has been great to continue the work that I was doing at Baylor here at the University of Mississippi, here in this community and across the state. And it's work that I care deeply about. I think dialogue and deliberation are sweet spots for me. And so I'm really glad that I get to do the work of helping people talk, helping people find their voice, helping people learn how to listen to others. And so I'm excited to be here. I think we were talking before we started that I'm a podcast junkie too. So I'm honored to be here and glad to have this conversation.
Yeah, I just am remembering talking to another guest about who also had a podcast about how many podcasts there were out there, and I was recommending other podcasts to him, and I said, there seems like there's so many podcasts, but there's so many good podcasts now, so it seems worth it to explore all this world of podcasting when so much good content is out there, and hopefully I'm contributing to some of your podcast feed.
Well, we will exchange lists later. I'm always looking for good podcasts. I think it's a great
awesome.
medium to share stories. And I think it just really resonates with me. I can listen on my own time when it's convenient. Mm-hmm. And I can engage with people that are doing really great work that otherwise I wouldn't have heard about.
Yeah. Well, we better hold off on geeking out about all the podcasts that we love because I want to talk about public deliberation. But I've asked this question to a number of different people, and it may be kind of a different question than you've had before, but I find it's interesting to kind of hear a little bit. What did you learn about conflict growing up? Or what were it may have been explicit, maybe it was a little more implicit, but what were some of the messages that you remember getting about conflict growing up?
How to avoid it? Perhaps.
Right. Okay. Yep.
I have two parents with very strong personalities. And so conflict was a part of everyday life, but it was something that I wanted to do my best to stay out of it, to stay above the fray. I did learn how to engage. I learned that some things are worth fighting for too. That sometimes there's times when even when it's uncomfortable, we need to speak up or we won't be heard. And our voice is important in that.
Yeah.
And then, my parents' strong personalities, conflict was a part of our experience. But how to love well in spite of it. My parents have been married over 50 years. And I think there's something about just staying in the mix that we can disagree. And that doesn't change our love for each other. It doesn't change our commitment to each other. And I think that was really important for me to see modeled growing up. I think it makes coming to this work easier to stay in dialogue with others when you can not feel like you're always risking a relationship or always risking losing something you care about in finding your own voice.
Yeah, that's really important and something maybe we haven't touched on before. I think all of us probably learn in some way how to manage conflict, and a lot of us are learning growing up like different ways to avoid conflict. Other people, it sounds like in your family, avoiding conflict was because there was maybe a lot of it, like there was a lot of engagement and a lot of dialogue and a lot going on. And so you wanted to kind of check out and be like, hey, give me a break, right? I can't handle conflict all the time. And other people learned to avoid conflict from families that were very passive, right? And maybe there was a lot of anxiety. So it's interesting to me that we're all learning different ways to avoid conflict or cope with conflict, and often we pick up whatever coping mechanisms, usually some more healthy and unhealthy than others, but it's interesting to see how all of those are still trying to figure out like how to avoid or manage conflict in some way. And I find that so fascinating to hear from different people what they went through kind of growing up,
Yes, and I think I've learned a lot about what I didn't learn either. That I really needed to find out how to proactively find my voice without having to assert my voice, where I could find my voice with among the voice of others. And I think that's something I'm still trying to learn and figure out how to navigate, and a real place of growth for me. I think that's also why I gravitate towards this kind of work, is because it's been so valuable and rich to me personally. Yeah.
We all end up with some gaps somewhere, right? That we got to kind of work through and work on. So tell us a little bit about maybe your journey, how you ended up finding out about public deliberation and got interested in starting working with that and developing the initiative at Baylor. And then tell us a little bit about what public deliberation is.
Sure. I think I really stumbled into this work. As part of my role at Baylor, I worked with college students in community engagement kind of work. And so part of what I was doing was helping students learn about different issues. And I remember I wanted to have a conversation around immigration. And honestly, Lucas, I was terrified. I was like, this could go really badly because I wanted a different kind of conversation. I wanted to be able to prompt some critical thinking and reflection. I didn't necessarily want it to be about taking sides or coming down on a stance on an issue. But I didn't know where to start. I was very intimidated by the conversation, but also just really looking. I also felt a compelling need that this was something important, particularly in Texas, particularly where immigration was such a pressing issue. And thinking about how are we building skills to talk about these issues because they are important. So around that time, another of my colleagues at Baylor had just started his work there. And he actually had done some work with public deliberation at his previous institution. And I reached out to him and said, hey, I'm interested in doing something on immigration. And he said, well, why don't we do a deliberative forum? And I said, well, tell me more. What is that? And he said, well, it's just kind of a structured conversation where we look at different perspectives on an issue. We kind of lead some critical reflection. We consider trade-offs. I was game. I was looking for something, a way to have this conversation. I had a partner and he had a tool, and we did not really know what we were doing. But we said, hey, let's have a forum on immigration and see how it goes. And we were blown away. We used a issue guide that was created by National Issues Forum. And they do a number of these deliberative issue guides to equip people to have these kind of conversations. And it was such a different kind of conversation. People left and said, hey, we want more. Can we do more forums? Can we do conversations on different issues? We thought that we were hosting a one-time event on immigration. We did not know that we were launching the Public Deliberation Initiative. But this work is so compelling, and I think people are so hungry for skills to talk across difference in a way to change the conversation that it just really took off. Our students gravitated towards it. We tackled a number of different issues on campus and in the community. Some of those were around campus carry, whether universities in Texas could opt in or out to allowing concealed weapons on campus. And it was a pressing campus issue that our campus was debating and having conversations about. And so we did a forum on it. We did forums on climate change, on immigration, on human trafficking, on the opioid epidemic, on a range of different issues. And we found that it's a valuable tool and process to bring people together to share our stories and to find some paths forward. I was hooked. I fell in love with it and just started really championing it because I think for me, it was a tool that could help all of us. I certainly don't think I'm unique in my struggle, wanting to retreat in silence and also wanting to find my voice at the same time. And I think this process enabled me to see my way forward to have conversations about really important issues, but it also gave me a platform to help other people find their voice and space for those really important conversations where we can talk and hear each other.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about, explain kind of what is the structure? What makes it, you said that the conversation when you did that first forum on immigration, that you wanted a different kind of conversation and that, your colleague came with this kind of framework and structure, but tell me a little bit about the framework and why does this and how does it have a structure that makes different conversations possible?
Sure. Well, in public deliberation, we're taking an issue and we're moving beyond the facts and the technical conversation. We want to shift the conversation to a values-based conversation. And part of the reasoning behind that is there's things that the experts can't answer for us. They can't tell us our personal lived experience. They can't tell us what's important to us. So when we're looking at any issue, whether it's healthcare or food access or community, we may want a lot of the same things for our communities, but the way we rank them may be differently. But we may rank those very differently. So in terms of thinking about if we can uncover what is important to us, what's driving the way we think about a certain issue. And for some of us, sometimes security is a big value. It's something we value very much. It affects the way we show up in the space. How do we feel safe? Or freedom or equality. All of these are shared values that we hold in common. And yet they're influenced by our lived experience. And so no one can tell us what we need to feel safe. Like the Campus Carry Forum is a great example, because if you talk to people that are kind of pro campus carry or anti campus carry, pro guns on campus or against guns on campus, talk to people on both sides of that dilemma, what's really at the heart of it is the need and desire to feel safe. And what makes some people feel safe is having a weapon to protect themselves and others. What makes other people feel safe is not having weapons, open weapons in an educational environment. But if we can focus on that shared need to feel safe, we've changed the conversation. We've also changed the range of solutions, because now there can be any number of different solutions to that issue. It may involve guns, but it may also involve other things like mental health or emergency preparedness or residential hall policies, all different kinds of things that feed into that conversation. But so many times we get stuck in that binary when we can only see pro-gun or anti-gun. When actually, if we dig a little bit deeper, we can uncover what's important to us. And as we start sharing that, we unlock potential. So in public deliberation, we're usually looking at 3 different approaches, and we want to bring out the value that's driving each one of those. So sometimes that value is security, or sometimes it's freedom, or sometimes it's compassion, or it could be hospitality. It could be anything that any positive value. And that does 2 things. One, it breaks down the binary. Sometimes we want to live in that world where there's an either or, a pro-con, Republican, Democrat, whatever that dichotomy is. And we want to break down that binary, and we want people to see, hey, 1, there is a range of options, and 2, it's not a good option versus a bad option. It's competing positive values. No one's going to vote, hey, we don't need to think about security, or we don't need to think about freedom. Those things are important to all of us. And we may not agree on the shape that takes, but when we can say, hey, these are competing goods, then it gives us a different platform to see each other not as enemies, but as working towards a common good, working towards a greater good.
Yeah.
So we'll deliberate across 3 different approaches. Equal time and consideration is given to each one. And in that time, we're talking about what are the best parts of that approach? What's the benefit of moving in this direction? And then what are the trade-offs? What do we lose if we move in this position? Sometimes we want to skip over the impact of our preferred approach. Sometimes we think, hey, we have the magic bullet and it has no negative consequences for anyone. Everyone should be on board with us. But that's not the reality in these complex issues. There's benefits and trade-offs to many different courses of action. And so we're going to spend intentional time talking about both of those, talking about, hey, what are the benefits? What do we gain by moving in this direction? What can action look like? What are some tangible steps that bring this approach to life? And then what are the costs involved in that? What do we lose if we move in this direction? What trade-offs? What impact does this have? Maybe unintended consequences does this action have? Yeah. And as we do that across those multiple approaches, we're broadening our depth and awareness of the issues. We're broadening a sense of the range of possibilities. The goal at the end of the forum is not that we all agree. We don't take a vote on which approach is our favorite and say, hey, this is the way we're going to go. Consensus is not the goal. The goal is to, well, there can be different goals for different forums. But in most of our forums, our goal is that broader awareness of understanding that we've created space for people to understand multiple perspectives. And we often hear that as a result, people are changed. They may not change where they fall on the issue, but they change their posture towards themselves and towards other people. They've humanized the issue in some real way, and they also have wrestled within themselves a little bit in terms of where they fall on the issue, how they think about the issue, and what they want to do themselves as a result.
Man, it's fantastic. Yeah, I'm falling in love with public deliberation all over again. One of the things that I remember really grabbing my attention was this idea of wicked problems. And I had never thought about it that way before until it was explained what a wicked problem is. So could you explain what a wicked problem is and how that's what public deliberation is kind of intended to tackle?
Sure. I think I always want to clarify and highlight and emphasize that it is wicked problem, not wicked people. That what we are doing is focusing on the problem. And what we understand is that not every problem has a technical solution. There are some issues that we can solve by bringing experts in the room and getting technical solutions. If we are building a dam and we need the engineering specifications, there are right answers to those problems. But for many of these issues that we're facing, that's not the nature of those problems. These are really complex social issues, and they are about they are value laden. So it very much gets to the heart of what's important to us as individuals. No expert can answer that for us. And also, it's not something that can be solved in an equation. It's something that we have to constantly balance and renegotiate over time, because the issues and the challenge themselves change over time. And we've seen this in a number of different issues. The way we think about mass shootings and the way we think about gun control has radically changed over the last couple of years as shootings have become more frequent and there's been more communities ravished by them. So the same answers that we had to those questions prior to that aren't necessarily the same ones that work for us today. We have to consistently continue to wrestle with questions and continue to renegotiate them for our current context and our current time. It's not like we ever solve healthcare or food access. We're constantly working on those issues because they're complex. There's a number of different variables, a number of different things in there. And that can feel, maybe sometimes that feels, hey, we're not making progress. We're still facing income inequality and poverty. We haven't eliminated it yet. But at the same time, it's not that it's a problem that can be solved. It's a problem that we're continuing to address and is worthy of continued investment and continued struggle, because we're consistently, it gets to the heart of consistently, what does it mean to be in community with each other? What are these challenges that we face in community with each other? And how do we consistently come together as communities change to consistently talk about those and to rediscover and re-innovate and to do community problem solving together?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of people like me who have a personality that tends to want solutions or want answers to problems or questions. And I think that's probably also why we see people gravitating towards certain narratives on both the left and the right in the U.S. Because these problems that we face are complicated and difficult, and there's a lot of different sides to them. And sometimes it's easier if we can have a simple narrative and just say, well, it's this, and that if we would just do this and we would just get maybe this person in office and then they would pass legislation to do X, the problem would be solved. And the idea of wicked problems really points out, like, these are long-term complex issues, as you said, that are changing and evolving over time. And maybe what's more helpful in addressing them is less coming to this sort of silver bullet idea of a one solution that's really going to change everything, and more working on our process. And the process brings us together as community, and we can begin to solve problems together. and we do make progress. I feel like there's a bit of a tension, right, between we do want to see some progress. We don't want to feel like we're spinning our wheels and doing nothing. But on the other hand, I feel like people who have really bought into this one silver bullet solution to whatever problem get burnt out when you start realizing that that's just not the way that it works, or it's not going to happen, or it doesn't get passed, and then now what do you do, or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, I think sometimes we have to embrace the messiness, and you're right. There is this tendency toward cynicism. I think we've seen that growing with the dysfunction on a national level. But I think that's one of the things I appreciate about deliberation is it's constantly moving us to action. So all throughout the deliberation, we're considering potential actions we can take. And those are at the individual level, they're at the community level, and there's government level. Now, I think when I started, I thought the outcome of a forum would be people would decide on policy, and it would be about moving forward legislative recommendations or signing petitions or advocating for specific policy decisions. And I think that's been one of the things that has really surprised me about public deliberation is people come away with a much broader range of action. Yes, there are political actions, and we do need to engage in as much as dysfunctional as our democracy is sometimes. We can't give up on it. We can't neglect it. We have to invest in it and work to make it better and to work to enhance those legislative processes, to pass laws, to shape policy, because they do have an impact on people's lives. But that doesn't keep us from taking individual action. That doesn't limit what we can do as individuals and communities. In fact, so much of what of the power of public deliberation comes from people coming away and saying, hey, this is what I can do. This is something I can do within my community, or I can host a conversation about this topic, or we need to have more conversations like this, or my school can get involved in this, or my apartment community can take this on, or what if my church got involved in this way? And when we start considering that broader range of possible actions, one, it's more hopeful because we see ourselves as agents of change, that there is something that we can do, and we're not paralyzed. We're not stuck in the gridlock, that we have agency. And it also allows us to connect with other people that we can partner with, that we can do collective action together. I said the goal is not consensus, but often what happens in a public deliberation forum is you may see people that disagree very differently on different approaches to immigration. However, as we talk through different approaches, you'll find area-specific actions that have a lot of agreement across different perspectives. And so while we may not have consensus on everything, we can find areas where there is a lot of common ground. And one, we need to identify that and celebrate that and say, hey, here's space where we can agree. And then that can become a shared action. That may be going back to thinking about taking it back to a church with the refugee program, or, one of the areas where there's a lot of common ground is around the Dreamers, the DACA students. People may fall very differently on immigration, but there's a lot of support for those children that came here through no decision of their own. And if we can focus on those areas where we have a lot of momentum and a lot of support, then it gives us something tangible to work towards. And so it's a both and, but I thought coming in, it would be much more on the policy political side. And it's just, I think part of the power of public deliberation is it's so much more than that. Yeah.
And, I have this question about this idea of civic engagement. In the U.S., we have one of the lowest voter turnout percentages in the developed world. And here in Bolivia, where I live now, I feel like I'm gonna say something wrong about the law, but voting is much more mandatory, and you're really required to participate in some way. And I know there's a lot of other countries that are similar where voting is not just a right or a privilege, but it's something that you're required to do to participate in some way. And so I often wonder about, and you kind of were touching on this a little bit in what you were saying just a second ago about ways that people start to get more engaged. But I wonder what do you think about why do we have such a low civic engagement in the US? And then the flip side of that is, why is civic engagement important? And maybe we should talk about like, what is civic engagement also, as you're talking about people talking about issues and beginning to find areas that they can take action in. That's very empowering, right? And hopeful. I think we tend to think of things only on the national level in the US, and we don't think of things on state, county, more local level. Why aren't people as involved, do you think? And then why is it important? And obviously you've seen people get more involved. So yeah, could you talk a little bit about, all of that?
Sure. That's a lot to unpack.
Sorry.
And I'm not sure I certainly don't think I have the answers to all of those questions.
Sure.
But I will share some thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
One, from my work with college students often get written off as apathetic. And I have found that is not the case. In fact, there's research that says when students are in college, they care more than any other time in their lives. They care about issues going on in the world, and they also care about people in their lives. Relationships are super important to them. At the same time, they tend to give less. They tend to invest less time, less money, to be less involved in charitable activity. And I think, so what I have discovered is I don't think it's that people don't care. When you talk to people, it doesn't have to be a long conversation to really uncover the ways that some of these issues impact our personal lives. We start every deliberative forum with a personal state question, like how has this issue impacted you? Like what brought you to this event on this particular issue? Because a lot of times people vote with their attendance, and the fact that they showed up for a forum on X topic means that was something of interest to them, that most likely it has touched their life in some way. And I think uncovering that story is really important. It's hugely important to the deliberative process because it humanizes the issues. But I think more broadly, it's important for us as a society to tap into our personal stories. And so many times we don't have space to share those stories with others. It seems like that we've lost some of those skills. We've lost some of the civic spaces that helped us build those skills. In Bowling Alone, the seminal work that said, hey, we've kind of lost some of the civic infrastructure. We used to have bowling leagues. We used to have opportunities and spaces for people to come together where they could talk about these different things. It was separate from our work, separate from church. It was space where we weren't in silos. And I think as a result, I think technology has certainly impacted that. The algorithms that help us curate our social media feeds to surround ourselves with people that think like us or view the world the same. I think a lot of those things have allowed us to find ourselves more in echo chambers. And without that practice, without the practice of being in conversation with people who see the world differently than we do, we've lost some of those skills. And now it's almost like disagreeing is personal instead of just an asset and a gift. And it is an asset. Or
even just like a part of life.
Right. Right. Like if you're in relationship with someone and you never have a disagreement, how deep is that relationship?
It might be a bad sign. Part of relationship
growth is managing conflict well and navigating through conflict together. And so I just lost some of those skills. And I think the more that we can create space for those kind of conversations, and the more we can start to build those skills again, the stronger we are, and the more that we remind ourselves that we can do this work. Sometimes, you have a whole podcast about things that we don't talk about. And the reality is that there are many things that we've been told so many times we're not supposed to talk about, that we decided not to talk about them. But the reality is we can talk about them. We have skills within us to have those conversations, and we do it for people that are really important to us. We can navigate those things, but sometimes we forget how to do that. And so we need to be reminded, and we need to have civic spaces where those kind of conversations can happen in a non-threatening way. I think one of the things that takes the pressure off is that public deliberation is a structured conversation. It's not a free-for-all. There's ground rules. We're setting the stage for this kind of conversation, because as we do that, we're reminding ourselves what it looks like to respect others. We're reminding ourselves how to listen to other people. We're reminding ourselves how to suspend judgment, or how to be curious instead of judgmental and asking questions. And I think that's a gift for all of us, because as much as we don't like to hear people that disagree with us, we're better for it. They sharpen us. They help us see things from a different perspective. They help us identify our blind spots. They help us critically reflect on our own perspective in ways that we wouldn't otherwise. So we're all better for it.
Yeah. I also think people we've sort of demonized government to mean like the big bad evil. And certainly government, I have a lot of problems with government, things that happen that I don't agree with, or corruption, or all kinds of things, right? The government, nobody's trying to pretend that government is perfect. But because we've sort of nationalized government in a lot of ways, where government is very big, right? And a lot of people want smaller government. Well, it turns out there's actually a smaller government in everyone's backyard.
Right.
Right? Like the city that you live in, some of those are bigger depending on what city you live in. But when you and I were in Waco, what I really discovered was a city the size of Waco, it's a decent sized city. It's about 120,000 people, give or take. So it's not like I know everyone in Waco, but it also is small enough that it's not that hard to get involved and participate. And just by being willing to be interested and talk to people and get involved, I ended up on a city committee and I ended up being the chair of the city committee just because I was showed up and said I would do it. I don't think I had any special skills or anything that qualified me for that. There are a lot of ways to get involved, right in your backyard, and I think it's important to remind people that the government is not someone else. The government is actually us, right? We either by voting or by not voting, by abstaining, you're participating in some way in whatever structures kind of govern your life. And if you want to have more say, or you're frustrated, like there are ways to get involved. Now, I'm not going to say that it's not frustrating. You and I both know that getting involved does not mean it's going to get easier, right? And as great as public deliberation is, we're not saying it's solving all the problems, but there are ways to get involved. And you find, like what I found when I got involved with the city of Waco was there are a lot of really great people. I may not agree with them on everything, but they care a lot about when you get involved in your local government. There are a lot of people who care about the city that they are trying to serve. And, you kind of have to work through things and hash it out. And I just want to encourage people to remember that government is not something else that's beyond you, that you are the government and you participate. And so if you don't like it, living in another country, where democracy is a little bit less stable, it reminds me very much that people here understand, like, if you don't like what's going on, you need to kind of take it into your hands to do something about it. And we kind of have gotten pretty comfy in the U.S. where we don't engage with the systems and the structures that way. And so it would help us to, get involved and find out and find an issue that does kind of, like you're saying, some of those particular issues that people connect with, that they show up and vote with their attendance, figure out what that is and get involved, because you are the government.
I agree. I think sometimes, I think a colleague once put it in terms of we have a consumer mindset about our communities instead of a creator mindset. And until we actually see ourselves as co-creators of the communities in which we live, we're waiting on someone else to do it. When actually our communities are much better when everyone is at the table and everyone is playing a role and being a part of how that community is coming together. The local level is so important. And also you see at the local level, new civic spaces emerging. Like, I mean, I think farmers markets definitely fit in that category. Gathering spaces where people come together. Sometimes Starbucks is that, the coffee shops, opportunities for people to connect and to have conversation. With voting, I wanted to come back to that a little bit. A lot of my work is in civic engagement. And, sometimes I get frustrated because there's a sense of voting is a bare minimum, a civic indicator. And I think we do it a disservice, one, when we name it as a bare minimum, because voting is actually important and every vote does matter, particularly in some of the close elections. But even when it doesn't impact the outcome of an election, I think it's important for us to vote, because when we vote, we have we're voicing our opinion. We're speaking into it. We're being a part of creating that outcome. But I think it's also something that we've taken for granted a lot in our society, because we have a stable democracy and we're like, oh, well, things are going to continue whether or not I participate. I think that's a dangerous step. I also think there's sometimes voting is also is a political act in and of itself. And voting is something that is a responsibility. And if we just go to the ballot box and we have no idea who's on the ballot, we have no idea what offices we're voting for, we're still not fulfilling our responsibility. And I think that's where the voting literacy comes in. Like, just we've lost some of that basic understanding. And I think that's why sometimes people are less inclined to vote on the local level, even when those positions may more impact their everyday lives. It's because I feel like they have less knowledge about what those roles are, what those offices do, what's important. And the more that we can help people understand what's on the ballot, why are these offices on the ballot? Who are we voting for? What are we voting for? Oftentimes there's a number of different amendments, and it can be intimidating to go. Particularly, I work with college students. College students, sometimes it's their first voting experience when they're in college. They may not know where to vote. They may not know how to vote. Like, if it's through a computer or technology, they may not know what that process looks like, what to expect when they go, what ID they might need. And then you get there and you're looking at all these offices. And, I've been doing this work for years, and sometimes I still go and I'm like, what is that office? Like, how did I not know about that? And I've been doing this work for years. So imagine an 18-year-old college student voting in their first election that goes and they're like, I have no idea what these things are. I don't know how to make sense of it. I don't know what to do. I don't know what should I be voting for? What should I not?
And sometimes, they're intentionally confusing too.
Yes.
In a recent election in Texas, there was an amendment related to state income tax, and apparently the way that it was worded, and I'm not an expert on this, so please don't email me, don't at me, but the way that it was worded, if you voted, Oh, I'm not even going to remember. Remember, it was so convoluted that
was
if you
true.
voted no, it meant yes to a state income tax. But then if you actually read it closer, it had been worded very confusing on purpose in order to sort of confuse the public. And then there was like a campaign, hey, this is confusing. You need to vote this way in order to say no to state income tax, which actually had the opposite effect and pass through some sort of amendments or whatever that were a little bit sneaky. And so it's like,
It's so
these
true.
games that people play. And then also that I think people, to bring it back to public deliberation, people feel very alienated about voting because it's an individual act and it really is a communal act, because if we all do it together, then we're voting as a society and as a community for the things that we want. But it feels very individual, and then it also feels kind of alienating when we don't necessarily understand all the things that are on the ballot. And so the thing that I love about public deliberation is that it begins to bring it down to the level where people are able to get engaged on issues and engaged with people in their community on problems and possibilities, as you said, for actions and steps that they can take. And voting can be part of that, or trying to get something onto the ballot for a specific problem. But it feels like all of the rallies to like just get out the vote are really frustrating, because people aren't grabbing onto all those good reasons why that we're talking about right now. And I love how public deliberation starts to get people engaged in a way that's different.
Absolutely. So thinking about how do we engage with each other's stories of voting, not necessarily who we voted for, but thinking about what was our experience voting as a child. Did we go with our parents to the polls? Did we hear stories about why voting was important? What messages did we internalize growing up about voting? And was it a rite of passage? Were we looking forward to voting when we turned 18? Was it something, did our parents take time off work to vote, or did they vote at all? And, I think it's important for us to remember voting is a political act. A lot of people sacrificed a lot for everyone to have the right to vote, for women to have the right to vote, for African Americans to have the right to vote.
Yeah.
And so the more we can connect with those stories, the more we can talk about why voting is important to us. Why is the act of voting important to us? That's really powerful. And that transcends party lines and partisan politics. It comes down to our civic fabric. So it can be a great connection point. And then once we see voting as, hey, something that is meaningful and significant to me, then we can think about how do we invest in learning about what's on the ballot? How can we start to make sense of the issues? Or how do we understand, how are we thinking about these issues? What resonates with us? And public deliberation is a great tool for that, to broaden our awareness, to really think through some of those issues, to move beyond the sound bites and the propaganda and the media campaigns. Politicians will tell us anything about what we want to hear, and it can all sound like good ideas. But let's wrestle with it. Let's talk about it. Well, if we move in this direction, what do we lose? Are we willing to pay more taxes for this service? And sometimes the answer is yes. And sometimes it's no, maybe not. And so I think it's that multi-layered process, but it can be really powerful when we see ourselves, again, as co-creators. And voting is just one way that we speak into the community that we want to have.
Yeah.
Certainly not the
definitely.
only way.
Yeah. So what do you have a story or a particular forum that stands out that really affected you, or where a particular person really was changed by the process that comes to mind?
That's a good question. Let me think about that.
Okay, I didn't send that one to you ahead of time, so it's okay.
There have been so many transformational moments. So I'm not sure that there's any one story that sticks out. But I'll give you a couple of snapshots. I remember after the Campus Carry Forum, in reading through comments afterwards, we had one participant say, "Hey, I thought everyone that was pro-gun was a gun-toting hillbilly, and now I don't think that anymore."
Mm-hmm.
Someone else said, I had never understood or experienced fear from someone about being racially profiled. That had never been part of my experience. I didn't understand it. And I actually heard that fear in what he or she was saying. And that's incredibly powerful. That it's humanizing the issue in ways that, like, hey, we're willing to say, hey, maybe it's not just about what's in my best interest. Maybe it's about what's in our collective best interest. And maybe some of my assumptions were wrong. And maybe I need to pause and listen to what other people have to say. And maybe we can leave changed as a result of it. I think one of the other times, I'll tell you, it is not a fact-based argument. We're not here to debate facts. And sometimes people aren't sure what to make of that. So we've had people come into a forum with the legal code with them and with their set of facts that they're ready to debate for their side.
Yeah.
And we tell them as we start, hey, don't have to do that. We're going to set that aside because we want to hear what's important to you. What do those facts mean to you? And why are they important? How does it change things for you? And I think there's a really powerful, it changes the conversation in some really powerful ways. I think we've seen people that came in on very different sides of an issue, and they'll leave with and continue the conversation. We had one time, we were doing a forum on mass shootings, and a male African-American college student was sitting right next to a white police officer. And to have both of them side by side in that conversation was incredibly powerful. And both of them engaged, and both of them shared their experience, and they shared their fears, and they shared their perspective, and they both were enriched by the conversation. And you can't script that. And it's not that public deliberation is not, there's a limit to it, because we're talking about policy issues. It's usually a one-time event. So it might be an hour, 2-hour conversation. We're not going to solve all the problems in the world. But if we can plant seeds to see and understand perspectives that are very different from our own, we're enriched by that. And it changes the way we approach those issues from that point on.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, I think it's probably a good time to start wrapping up. I want to wrap up with 2 questions, something that we can do, an action step we want to recommend, and then maybe a resource or a recommendation we can share for going deeper on this topic. And I'll start. You mentioned the National Issues Forums, and I've seen the placemats. I've seen the issue sheets that have the different, 3 different approaches, and I've been through public deliberation before, but I wasn't aware of National Issues Forums. And it is a fantastic resource for somebody who maybe isn't very aware of public deliberation initiative, but you can see on certain issues how they create guides for conversations. And I think just looking at those is a start maybe for some people, just to imagine conversations about these issues that are different. I know training in public deliberation and facilitation and all of that is maybe a level deeper, but I would recommend, and I'll put it in show notes, this National Issues Forums. Take a look at the issue guides and begin to kind of think about how you approach those issues and different ways that this might affect how you have conversations and how you can kind of set them up. And maybe there's, Erin, maybe we'll have some resources for finding out if there are people in your area doing public deliberation that you could connect with and get connected to. Another recommendation I want to make for going deeper, since we did talk a lot about voting, and I do feel like things are very confusing this last election in Texas, even though I'm not even in Texas right now, following all my friends on Facebook. And, I have friends across the spectrum from my hometown to all my crazy liberal hippie friends that like I was really frustrated that it was not clear, and it's very frustrating. So one of the best resources I think that's been around for a very, very long time is the League of Women Voters. And they have a fantastic website that's vote411.org, and I'll put that in the show notes too. And it's nonpartisan. It really just breaks down the ballots and amendments and gives you the 411. It lets you know exactly what you're voting for, and it's a great resource for understanding and helping you feel a little bit more informed when you go to the ballot and knowing what you would be voting for if you vote one way or the other. So, Erin, what's something that you want to recommend that people do, an action step, and any other recommendations, especially for connecting to public deliberation initiatives and groups that are in local areas?
Sure. I think as far as action steps go, I want to challenge your listeners to start small within their sphere of influence and embrace the messiness. Have a conversation with someone you care about something that you disagree on, and just lean into the conversation. Maybe even just tell them, hey, I know we disagree on this. I care about you, and I just want to practice. I trust you enough that I think we can stay in conversation together, and I want to hear. Some great starters for doing that is just to say things like, tell me more. If someone tells you what they think about an issue, just say, well, tell me more about that.
Yeah.
How does that fit in with your lived experience? Great prompts. I wonder if, for bringing your side in perspective, or to questioning without just saying, well, that's crazy, or, but what about this? I've learned also, I'm sure I picked this up from someone along the way, but the phrase, I see it differently, can be a real gift. Just to say, hey, it's okay that we see it differently. That doesn't change the way we are in relationship with each other. And it's a good thing that we see things from different perspectives, because then collectively we can put those perspectives together and have a deeper understanding and appreciation. I think on social media, I think is one of the hardest spaces for these kind of conversations, but I also think it's so important to humanize our social media too. So one of the simple practices that I have started doing is, if I'm going to disagree with someone on social media, if I'm going to post a comment to something they posted, or if they comment on something I post and I want to reply back, I want to really humanize that. I want to connect, not just share my thought, but put it in the context of our relationship. Ask about other parts of their lives, like reconnect with them, use their first name. Like, it's so easy to get into this anonymous space on social media. And we lose something when we lose the humanity in these conversations. So anything we can do to connect the conversation with the relationship, I think really, really helps. And also don't forget that, connect on what you have in common. There can be things that we disagree on, but what bonds us together are the things that we share. And so if we're only disagreeing with each other, we're not doing anyone any justice.
Right.
Invest in the areas where we can agree, and the things that bring us together, and the bonds that do matter. And there's a lot more things than we realize in that regard. Yeah,
that is such a helpful tip, Erin. And I've seen it in conversations that I've been in too. If you can lead, and I'm not very good at doing this, because I'm really good at kind of picking apart the problems or finding all of the cracks and arguments or whatever. And so I've had to be intentional about making it a practice. But if you can find those things where you agree with somebody, or you have a positive kind of connection, and you lead with that and say, yeah, I hear you saying this, and I actually really agree with you on this point, it's a little bit easier to then make the turn and say, here's where I see it a little different than you do. And I wonder what you think about that aspect of it, because you've come at it from a point of agreement first, and then say, we do agree here, and here's where I see it different. and then asking for feedback too. I think that's another thing that we usually aren't doing. We try to get the zinger in and kind of win the argument, but if we can kind of ask for, like, what do you think about that? Like, what would you say about this question? And being really honestly curious to kind of hear their feedback, that also creates a little better space. So yeah, I love that. Thank you for saying that. Yeah.
And some resources or recommendations. One, I'll point people towards the Baylor PDI site, Baylor Public Deliberation. I'll send you that link for you to share. And it has some resources and some training, some great tips for getting started. Also, for those that are interested in what this work looks like in within churches or congregations, there's also a section on there that's part of a new collaborative network we're working to get off the ground on faith and deliberation. Really thinking about how churches can have these conversations within themselves, and then how can churches speak into the community themselves. Churches are certainly not immune to some of the divisiveness that is going on, but they're often one of the few gathering spaces where people still do come together across political difference. And so there's also opportunities for the church to play a role in that and to be a facilitator in some of those conversations. So I'll just point people in that direction. There's also some liturgies there, some other things that whether pastors or lay people that might be interested in this kind of work can find some helpful resources. There's also some books that have been really profound to me, and so I thought I would just share some of those. One is I Think You're Wrong, But I'm Listening. This is by Sarah Holland and Beth Silvers. They are part of the Pantsuit Politics podcast. And this is really, it is a wonderful practical book about how to have grace-filled political conversations. They come from very different ideological perspectives. They have a close friendship, and they've really done some work in making it accessible and just practicing that conversation across difference. I found it really helpful and really practical in terms of thinking about how we can engage more in these kind of conversations, whether it's in a deliberative space or whether it's just in our everyday interactions with other people. Another great book is John Bachman, Why Can't We Talk? Christian Wisdom on Dialogue as a Habit of the Heart. And I think for me, it's a great piece in thinking about this work as a spiritual practice, that there is a lot of spiritual work that comes in learning to listen to others and really engaging in dialogue with people across difference and learning to disagree well and to love well in the midst of disagreement. And so that book has just been really practical and helpful. We've done at Baylor, we did a lot of that work with faculty and students. I've also used it with other churches and other faith communities. And then last, Sherry Turkle's book, The Art of Conversation, is just a wonderful delve into the ability to connect with other people. And she talks about some of the ways technology has impacted our ability to connect. But she also offers some practical solutions for how do we recover just the art of talking and connecting with each other. How do we see ourselves as neighbors again, and to build empathy and to start to see each other as human beings and full, whole humans created for connection and relationship. And so those three books I wanted to recommend and give a shout out. They've been really helpful in my journey in this work. And I think they're easy reads. And so I wanted to pass those along as well.
Fantastic. Yeah, I love book recommendations, and I will definitely include those in the show notes. Erin, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me and share. I feel like we've almost kind of just scratched the surface. There's a whole lot more I know in your work and in these conversations that has really, I don't know, it reveals a lot. There's a lot of depth when you spend time. You know, one of the aspects that I feel like we could talk a little more about maybe another time is the way that you mentioned experts, and in public deliberation, it's kind of, we get away from experts and it's just us around the table, and we might have some different experiences, but we're not experts sitting around the table. We're just the people sort of in the community. And the idea that the solutions to our problems are at the table, and that we don't need to have necessarily, we do need experts for certain things, especially when they're like logistics or engineering or lots of other things. But these wicked problems in many ways just require us to be able to sit down together and be able to start working it out together. Anyways, I feel like we've sort of scratched the surface, and maybe we can have another round to go a little bit deeper and talk about more aspects of this. But thank you so much for spending your time and telling us about public deliberation. I really hope people will check it out, because it was just a like paradigm shift for me when I got involved with you guys at Baylor. So thank you.
Well, that sounds great. Thank you so much for the opportunity. I'm so excited to connect with your listeners and just excited to share about this work. I think it really is valuable. I get on my soapbox because I am such a champion that when we come to the table together, we can do community problem solving. We can do citizenship. We can do community work, and we can be in community together.
What a great note to end on.
Yes, we just need skills and opportunity and space to do that.
Yeah. Fantastic. Thanks, Erin.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us today on We Don't Talk About That with Lucas Land. If you like what you hear, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any episodes. Help us spread the word by sharing it on social media. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram with the handle @WDTAT Podcast. You can also rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. You can support the podcast by visiting our website at wdtatpodcast.com and clicking on support. You can make a one-time donation or consider becoming a monthly supporter through Patreon. You'll receive bonus content and access to patron-only benefits. Thanks for your support. We would love to hear from you. Leave us a voicemail by going to our website and clicking Send Voicemail. Your voicemail could be featured in a future episode. You can also email us at wdtatpodcast@gmail.com. Many thanks to Neil Curran and Infielder for the use of their music. You can find more of their music online at infielder.bandcamp.com. A final thought from Brené Brown. The willingness to show up changes us. It makes us a little braver each time. Until next time, keep showing up and keep being brave.
What are you gonna do?